All right, talking Texas football, we are breaking down as many positions in the country as we can possibly get to. We're starting with Texas, this first in a long, long series. And at wide receiver, it's an exciting position considering Sam Ehlinger has turned into a much more polished passer than what we saw just a year ago. So his growth and development was substantial this past year. I'm a little disappointed that Lil Jordan Humphrey opted to go to the NFL. And Colin Johnson, I believe, is back. So your thoughts about Texas at wide receiver and what we expect to see this fall?
Oh, this would be maybe a top 5 unit in the country if Lil Jordan Humphrey returned, because he was that productive. He goes to the draft, doesn't get drafted, but he was unstoppable last year. Just not the fastest receiver, but he was strong-armed and he could just get yards out of anything. But now they have another strong-arm receiver, 6'6" guy, Colin Johnson. And this guy, I think he will be high on the draft boards this year. I think he'll be a top 3-round pick. Very good vertical game for Colin Johnson. He's great on those jump balls. Sometimes, I know a similar name, I said sometimes he'll even remind me of Calvin Johnson with some of his strength there, a college version of him. But Colin Johnson, I think, is really going to lead this unit this year. And then after Colin Johnson, they don't have another star receiver, but someone can always mold into that. Lil Jordan Humphrey wasn't really viewed as a top receiver. He wasn't someone who they thought was going to go to the draft after his junior year until he just had a breakout season last year. So there's a lot of guys that could have breakout seasons. I'm looking at sophomores, Joshua Moore and Brennan Eagles, players that didn't get much playing time last year, but they were highly rated recruits, guys that have produced in spring games and produced in practices before, because I don't see Texas getting as much production out of the other seniors. I mean, Devin Duvernay will probably be the other main starting outside receiver along with Colin Johnson. And then they have John Burt, someone who played a lot as a freshman. He's a track star for the team. But I think last year, I think he took a red shirt for just having one catch all season. And as a freshman, he was a starter, and I think he'll go back into a big role this year just with his speed alone. He's one of those Ted Ginn Jr. type receivers who will burn you down the field. Doesn't have the best hands, but what he lacks in hands, he can make up for with his speed. And he's Devin Duvernay is also one of those track star guys. I mean, he has so much speed too, and he'll contribute a lot to the offense. For the other receivers, they have Deshaun Jameson, who's a sophomore, and then the other guys who I mentioned that could be prime for breakout years, Joshua Moore and Brendan Eagles. So they have a lot of weapons, and I've noticed that I think Sam Ehlinger makes receivers better. I mean, I don't know if it's Tim Becker, the offense, but I noticed that Texas's receivers have been a lot better than they were in the Charlie Strong years ever since Sam Ehlinger stepped up as quarterback. Ehlinger last year had a very accurate season, didn't throw many interceptions, and he got the receivers the balls that they needed on target. So I think the receiver position, I think they'll be around the same level as they were last year. They might take just a little bit of a tumble if nobody can step up and replace Lil Jordan Humphrey's production, because he was so fantastic. I think all the Georgia fans, or almost all those teams that he just dominated last year, will probably realize how valuable Lil Jordan Humphrey was to this team. But I think this time it's a year for Colin Johnson to retake his role back from 2 years ago as the main guy, and the rest of the receivers, it's just time to step up.
So as you mentioned, Steve, a lot of production gap there with Lil Jordan Humphrey leaving. Burt had the one catch, as you mentioned. Eagles with only one catch for 35 yards. Joshua Moore with 7 catches. Devin Duvernay, the third option in the pass game last year, comes back with 41 catches and 4 touchdowns at 13 yards per reception. But Lil Jordan Humphrey, I don't think anyone expected to have the quite numbers that he had in 2018 at 86 catches, 9 touchdowns, and almost 1,200 yards. So a big production gap to be made up, but we see it every year in college football where guys that have the big pedigrees coming out of high school are able to. And when you've got a cross section of them, you've got 4 or 5 guys, the numbers speak to the probabilities that 1 or 2 of them are going to show up and be able to fill that gap and emerge in August camp to show that they need playing time and that they need targets, and that should happen for this Texas offense.